Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is something I do with my World History 2 students, and I just wanted to see how you guys like doing notes this way instead of doing them in class while we had the mess of DC CAS to deal with. So, today we're going to be talking about colonialism, mercantilism, and the Columbian Exchange. And you can take Cornell notes, bullet point notes, whichever style notes you like, but I'm going to need to see some notes from you. And I will also need to see the answers to the questions as we go through the checkpoints. So these can all be on one sheet of paper, but I will be looking at both parts, both the notes and the questions. So you can take them in your notebook. We're going to be going over the answers in class, but there might be a little quiz afterwards, or beforehand, I should say. So make sure you take really good notes and pay attention. Here we go. First, instead of a do now, we're going to have a warm-up question. So the warm-up question is, what do you know about colonialism? Think about when you've learned about colonies in the past, maybe in middle school, or maybe when we've talked about it briefly in this class. So you can pause this video at any time so that you can focus on the question at hand. I'm going to move through the video at a pretty steady pace, so it's not too long, but feel free to pause, rewind as much as you like. Okay, our objectives for today. Students will be able to define colonialism and mercantilism in order to critique the justice of these political policies. So that M word is mercantilism. First, let's start with colonialism. What is colonialism? Colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying its settlers, and exploiting its resources. So this might be a part where it's helpful to put this in your own this definition in your own words, because some of these words are kind of vague, or maybe you don't know exactly what they mean. So basically, colonialism is when a country takes over another country and puts people there and takes its resources, basically. So, for instance, you might have said for the warm-up question that when the British came to North America, they took political control over those 13 colonies. So different people had different control over those parts of the colonies. That's why there were 13 of them instead of one giant colony. These were our colonial empires in 1763. So you can see right here, North America, that's all British and French. And then right here, the yellow is Spanish. The green is Portuguese. And you can also see little pockets of Portuguese over here, and over here, and that's mostly due to a man named Vasco da Gama, and we're going to talk about him in a couple slides. And the Russian Empire, they're a little interesting because they mostly expanded within themselves. So instead of taking over seized colonies, they just annexed more territory onto their existing territory. And Indonesia is also interesting down here because they're purple. So that means they're Dutch, and that is from the Netherlands. So the Netherlands is Dutch, right? So this is actually called the Dutch East Indies down here. So in colonialism, we have a mother country who's the colonizing power, and the mother country is the one that imposes that political, social, and economic control over the different colonies. So you have the colony and the mother country. The mother country, for the British colony's case, would be Britain, or England, or the United Kingdom. For our intents and purposes in this class, that they're all the same thing. So this is basically the same map that we just looked at, and you can also see the Ottoman Empire on this map, and a couple different existing colonies here. So India grew a little bit, so they're not a British colony yet, but that's coming soon. And the Portuguese colony, you can see, expanded into Africa and into Brazil a little bit. Okay, so our significant explorers, which we began talking about a little bit last class with our Facebook pages in that reading. But I just wanted to summarize what each one of them did that was significant. Vasco da Gama began European colonialization in India. So he was the one to really first take a foothold in the subcontinent of India for the Europeans. And so he was Portuguese. Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated the globe and proved the earth was round. Basically, he sailed in one direction and went all the way around the earth. That's what circumnavigated means. He went all the way around the earth, and therefore he didn't fall off, so he proved the earth was round. Prince Henry the Navigator is best known for his exploration of the continent of Africa. So he was really the first one to start putting ports in Africa for the Portuguese, and that's really where the slave trade arose from. Okay, one we didn't mention, who you may have heard of before, is Amerigo Vespucci. He was an Italian explorer, and he discovered that America, or the West Indies, and Brazil were not actually the West Indies or Asia's eastern outskirts, but they were new territory. So remember how there was Europe, and obviously, and we've talked about how the African and Islamic and Asian empires had contact with those in Europe, and so they realized that those people existed. That's why they wanted to get there. They just wanted a shorter way. So they thought when they hit land that it was Asia. They just assumed that they had gone all the way around the world after Magellan had done that, and that it was actually Asia's eastern outskirts. They didn't really understand that the Pacific Ocean was as big as it was. So that's why, you may have learned this in middle school or elementary school, Christopher Columbus believed that those Native Americans were actually Indians, and that's why sometimes we call them, politically incorrectly, Indians today. So the Americas are named after Amerigo Vespucci because Amerigo Vespucci said, no, Columbus is wrong. This is not Asia. This is a new land. So this is where we get this term, New World. Bartolomé Diaz was Portuguese, and he was the first European to sail around the southernmost tip of Africa, which is called the Cape of Good Hope. So that's why he's significant. And he again contributed to that Portuguese founding of ports along the coast of Africa that contributed to the slave trade. Okay, I want you to take a look at this world languages. You don't need to write anything down about this. So this map shows basically the world languages group, and it's cut off on the slide here, but the blue is French. So you see blue in France and Africa and a little bit in South America. And then that teal color is Arabic in North Africa. We've talked about that. The other major languages, we have English, Canada, America, somewhat in Africa, and Australia. Also, we have Portuguese, Brazil, those same ports in Africa that there was colonization, and of course, Portugal. Now take a look at this religion map. This is a little bit harder to read because it's very complicated how many religions there are in the world. But you can see most of Central and South America are Roman Catholics, and then Protestants and other Christians, that makes up most of the rest of the Americas. And in the continent of Africa, we've got some Sikhs, some indigenous religions, we've got definitely some Muslims in the northern Africa, and then Europe is mostly Catholic, and so is Australia. Okay, so this is our first, what I'm calling checkpoint, and this is 4 questions. So again, you can pause the video, rewind, find these answers if you want, and take as much time as you need to answer them, but I'm going to read through them and then move on. Question number 2. Remember, question number 1 was our warm-up question. Define colonialism in your own words. Question number 3. How did the age of exploration lead to colonialism? Question number 4. What benefits would colonialism bring to another country? A mother country, I should say, sorry. Number 5. What long-term consequences can you deduce based on the previous maps? So for number 5, think about those religion and language maps that we just looked at. Okay, our second objective is, what is mercantilism? Mercantilism is a British economic theory, and it was the increase in power of a mother country by creating a favorable balance of trade. So a balance of trade is when things go in, things come out, and that is the trade of a country. So a favorable balance of trade would be that you want to put out more than you're taking in. So that means you make a profit. So the mother country wanted to make a profit. So they need gold to become powerful. So they explore and conquer for gold and resources. That's that wealth, right? That's one of their motivations. Remember we said glory, God, and gold. Gold. Number 3, they wanted to take raw materials from colonies. Then they would take it back to the mother country. They would manufacture the raw materials, and they would sell their manufactured goods back to the colonies for a profit. So here's just a map breaking that down. You can see how manufactured goods went from Great Britain to the West Indies and Great Britain to New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, those major port cities. So these ships are going back and forth. So obviously you don't want to waste a trip. These are hard trips that they took. So they would go back to Britain with their raw materials, be manufactured there. They would take other manufactured goods down to Africa, and then they would take some things from Africa, namely salt, which we've talked about, wine from the Mediterranean, and other little things, maybe some olives, things like that. And of course, they would also take people back to the colonies with them. And notice how the slaves not only went to the Eastern Shore colonies, but they also went to the West Indies. And so that is going to be the second half of this unit. It's called regional slavery. We're going to be expanding our concept of slavery and what that means. So here's just a little animation for you on mercantilism. We've got raw materials like lumber, coal, fish, cotton from the south, other herbs and flora, plants. So these resources go to England on their ships. And then England, they get turned into wallpaper, teapots, furniture, shoes, clothing, that kind of thing. Some things like porcelain and wallpaper and silks and spices they get from their existing trade routes with Asia and Africa. So these go back to the colonies as manufactured goods. And so then, because what costs more, a fish or a nice fine china porcelain teapot? The teapot. So England, the mother country, is the one to profit off of these colonies. This is that favorable balance of trade. Okay, checkpoint number 2. 6. In your own words, define mercantilism. Number 7. What does the mother country import from the colonies? Number 8. What do the colonies buy from the mother country? So our next little section here is called the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is a term used to describe the flow of goods, ideas, and diseases between the East and Western hemispheres. It is everything that can be exchanged was exchanged between the Old and New World. The Old World is Europe and Eastern Asia. And remember I said this is because they already knew about each other. So the Old World is Europe and East Asia, places where they had existing trade routes. The New World is the place that they being the Europeans, had just realized was there. They didn't discover it necessarily. And so that's the Americas. So my question for you for after this little slide is, why are the Old and New World called the Old and New World? Whose perspective is this from? Who were they old to and who were they new to? 10. Why is the Columbian Exchange called the Columbian Exchange? 11. Brainstorm 3 things the New World could have received in the Columbian Exchange and 3 things the Old World could have received. Now, this is going to be on that separate worksheet that you should have received in class today. So that's that first T-chart at the very top of the page. Under New, you're going to write at least 3 things that you think the New World would have received from the Old World in this process. And on the Old World side, you're going to write 3 things you think the Old World could have received. So this is just based on prior knowledge and your best guesses. What do you think came from where? Or I should say, on your chart it should look like who received what in this process. And then you don't have to do anything else with that sheet. We're going to finish the rest in class and be teasing out this process of the Columbian Exchange a little more. That's all I have for you. Good job. Remember to turn in those notes and the questions next class.